What if you could diagnose complex medical conditions while being completely asleep? In 1910, the medical community faced an impossible puzzle. A man with no medical training was providing detailed diagnoses and treatments, often for patients hundreds of miles away, all while in a deep trance-like sleep. His accuracy rate, an astounding 93% documented cases. And this is where our story gets truly extraordinary. Before we unravel this mystery, ask yourself, where do you draw the line between science and the unexplainable? Keep that question in mind as we explore one of medicine's most fascinating cases. Edgar Cayce's story begins not in a hospital or research facility, but in a humble farmhouse in Kentucky, 1877. As a child, he displayed an ability that would baffle his teachers. He could sleep on his schoolbooks and wake up having memorized every page. When asked how, he simply said, "The information just comes to me in my sleep." But it wasn't until young Edgar developed a severe case of laryngitis that his remarkable abilities took a strange turn. After conventional treatments failed, he fell into a self-induced trance and provided his own diagnosis and cure. Within days, his voice returned. Word spread quickly. A man who could diagnose himself in his sleep. Local doctors were skeptical, until they witnessed it themselves. Dr. Wesley Ketchum would later write, "I have seen him diagnose hundreds of cases, telling the condition better than I could after a careful examination, and all this while he was sound asleep." But how could someone with no medical training understand complex terminology? Even more baffling, how could he diagnose patients hundreds of miles away, having never met them? The year was 1901, and Edgar Cayce was about to face his greatest test. A 5-year-old girl was dying from what doctors called incurable stomach problems. Her desperate parents had heard rumors about the sleeping prophet. What happened next would change medical history. In his sleep, Cayce described her condition in perfect medical terminology, then prescribed a simple treatment the doctors had overlooked. Within weeks, the girl made a full recovery. But this wasn't an isolated case. Over the next 40 years, Cayce would give more than 14,000 documented readings, each one recorded by a stenographer, witnessed by doctors, and preserved for future study. What makes Cayce's case so extraordinary isn't just the number of readings he gave, it's their stunning level of accuracy. While in his trance state, he would often describe medical conditions using terminology he couldn't possibly have known, predict illness before modern diagnostic tools could detect them, recommend treatments that wouldn't be discovered by science for decades. Take the case of New York businessman Arthur Lammers. In 1923, doctors told him he had 3 months to live. During his reading, the sleeping Cayce diagnosed a rare blood condition and prescribed an unusual combination of medicines and dietary changes. Lammers lived for another 47 years. But here's where the story becomes even more puzzling. When awake, Cayce couldn't remember anything from his readings. He couldn't even pronounce the medical terms he'd used while asleep. Modern science has documented cases of heightened mental ability during altered states of consciousness. But nothing comes close to explaining how a man with an 8th grade education could diagnose patients he'd never met, prescribe complex treatments, understand advanced medical concepts, all while being, by every medical definition, asleep. And then came the case that would challenge everything the medical community thought they understood. In 1925, a group of skeptical doctors decided to put Cayce to the ultimate test. They would send him a series of their most puzzling cases, using only the patient's names and locations, no other information. The results shocked them. Not only did Cayce accurately diagnose each case, but in several instances, he found underlying conditions the doctors had missed. But one case stood out. A woman in Nebraska, given only months to live, received a reading that seemed to defy medical logic. Cayce, while in his trance state, said, The doctors are looking in the wrong place. The problem isn't in her lungs, as they believe, but in a tiny bone misalignment in her upper spine, pressing on a nerve that's affecting her breathing. The doctors were skeptical. This went against everything they'd diagnosed. But with nothing left to lose, they investigated Cayce's claim. X-rays revealed exactly what he had described, a slight misalignment that every previous examination had missed. After corrective treatment, the woman made a full recovery. Dr. Harold J. Riley, who studied Cayce's work for decades, would later write, "In all my years of medical practice, I've never seen anything that could explain how he did it. It was as if, in his sleep, he had access to all medical knowledge, past, present, and sometimes even future." Perhaps the most extraordinary case came in 1927, when Cayce did something unprecedented. He diagnosed himself while in his trance state. Doctors had found spots on his lungs that they believed were cancer. But in his sleep, Cayce said something unexpected. "The spots aren't cancer. They're scars from chemical burns, from my photography work years ago." The doctors were skeptical. But then someone remembered. Cayce had worked as a photographer in his youth, regularly exposing himself to harsh darkroom chemicals. Further investigation proved him right. The spots were indeed chemical scarring. But not all cases were so easily verified. In 1931, Cayce gave a reading that would challenge the very boundaries of what seemed possible. A young boy in Oklahoma was experiencing seizures. Without ever seeing the child, Cayce not only diagnosed the problem but described a fall the boy had taken 2 years earlier, a fall his own parents had forgotten about. The impact, Cayce said, had created a small blood clot in his brain. Surgery confirmed every detail. But this raised a troubling question. How could Cayce know about an accident that even the family had forgotten? This case marked a turning point. The medical community now had to wrestle with an uncomfortable question. Was this still medicine, or something else entirely? As Cayce's fame grew, so did the efforts to understand his abilities. By the 1930s, he was drawing attention from an unlikely mix of researchers. Medical doctors seeking explanations. Sleep researchers studying his trance states. Psychologists analyzing his methods. Skeptics attempting to debunk his work. But for every expert who claimed to find a scientific explanation, another would discover something that defied conventional understanding. Dr. Harmon Brough, a researcher from the University of Chicago, spent years studying Cayce's trance states. His findings were remarkable. Cayce's brainwave patterns during readings were unlike any previously recorded. His medical accuracy rate far exceeded statistical probability. He could accurately describe distant locations he'd never visited. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. In his later readings, Cayce began describing things that made even his strongest supporters uncomfortable. He spoke of past lives, ancient civilizations, and future events. The medical community, which had cautiously accepted his diagnostic abilities, now faced a difficult question. Could they continue to embrace the medical aspects of his work while explaining away everything else? The controversy divided the scientific community. As one doctor wrote, "How do we explain a man who can diagnose complex medical conditions with 93% accuracy, yet also claims to access information from what he calls universal consciousness?" By 1944, Edgar Cayce was exhausted. Despite his own readings warning him to rest, he continued giving readings for the endless stream of desperate people seeking help. In one of his final readings, he made a haunting prediction about himself: the body is tired. If it continues at this pace, it will simply stop. On January 3, 1945, at the age of 67, that prediction came true. Edgar Cayce, the man who had diagnosed thousands while sleeping, fell into his final sleep. But this isn't where the story ends. Today, in modern sleep labs equipped with technology Cayce could never have imagined, scientists continue studying the mysteries he left behind. How could he access complex medical knowledge while unconscious? Why did his brainwave patterns differ from all known sleep states? How did he achieve such remarkable accuracy without medical training? Perhaps most intriguingly, modern medicine has confirmed hundreds of his treatments that seemed bizarre in his time. His recommendation of osteopathic adjustments for certain conditions. The use of gold compounds for arthritis. Specific dietary recommendations now proven by nutritional science. Dr. Gladys McGarry, a modern medical researcher, notes, the more we advance in medicine, the more Cayce's readings prove to have been ahead of their time. It's as if he had access to medical knowledge that wouldn't be discovered for decades. Today, the Association for Research and Enlightenment maintains over 14,000 of Cayce's readings. Every year, researchers discover new connections between his recommendations and modern medical breakthroughs. In 2019, a team of medical researchers found that one of Cayce's bizarre 1922 treatments for skin conditions matched exactly with a newly discovered therapeutic approach, nearly 100 years later. But perhaps the most intriguing question isn't about what Cayce could do, but what his abilities suggest about human consciousness itself. As Dr. Elizabeth Moore, a contemporary sleep researcher, puts it, either Cayce was accessing knowledge that simply didn't exist in his time, or we still don't understand the full capabilities of the human mind during sleep. The sleeping prophet left us with a profound mystery. In an age of advanced medical science and brain imaging, we can document what he did, but we still can't explain how he did it. So next time you drift off to sleep, consider this. Are we all connected to some vast reservoir of knowledge, as Cayce believed? Or did this humble photographer simply tap into something within the human mind that science has yet to understand? The answer is still sleeping. What do you think? Explains Edgar Cayce's abilities. Share your theories in the comments below.